In the quiet moments of life, when the heart feels heavy and the soul reaches toward the heavens with trembling hope, there often comes a silence so profound it shakes the very core of faith. This silence does not come from the absence of need, nor from a lack of effort. It comes after countless whispered pleas in the night, after tears have soaked the pillow, after words have run out but the pain remains. For many, this is the most unsettling part of a life of prayer, the moments when God seems quiet. People pray for healing, for deliverance, for clarity, for peace. They pray for relationships to be restored, for children to come home, for illnesses to vanish. They pray for jobs, for direction, for miracles. And yet sometimes those prayers are met not with answers, but with stillness. No thunder from the sky, no unmistakable sign, just silence. This silence can feel like a wound, not because God owes us an explanation, but because we have been taught to believe that prayer is a bridge, a connection between our heart and the heart of God. When that bridge feels empty, when no footsteps seem to cross it in return, a deep ache can settle in the soul. Questions begin to rise, quietly at first, then more urgently. Does God hear me? Did I do something wrong? Am I asking for too much? Or maybe the most painful question of all, am I not worthy of an answer? These thoughts do not always come in moments of rebellion or disbelief. Often they rise from deep places of faith, from people who have walked with God and trusted Him through many storms. It is not always doubt that fuels these questions. Sometimes it is love. A love that longs to understand why heaven seems silent when the heart is breaking. Unanswered prayer is not a simple matter of theology or doctrine. It is personal. It reaches into the very fabric of a person's relationship with God. It touches grief, hope, fear, and trust all at once. It is the place where belief meets longing, where the soul tries to reconcile what it knows of God with what it feels in the silence. This is not a space for quick answers or shallow comfort. It is a space that requires honesty and gentleness. A place where one can sit with the questions and still believe, where one can say, I do not understand, and still hold on, where faith does not mean pretending to be unshaken, but choosing not to walk away. Many who walk this path have felt alone, but they are not. Across generations, from ancient scriptures to modern testimonies, there have always been those who wrestled with the quiet of heaven. Even in the Psalms, the heart cry is clear. In Psalm 13, verse 1, the question echoes through time, How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? These words, though ancient, feel current. They give voice to the silent pain many carry today. They remind us that it is not a lack of faith to ask where God is. It is a part of the journey. So if you are in that place right now, waiting, aching, wondering, you are not alone. You are not forgotten. And the silence does not mean your voice has not been heard. This journey is not about fixing God into a box of human expectations. It is about understanding more deeply the nature of prayer, the mystery of divine will, and the quiet work that often takes place when it feels like nothing is happening at all. It is about discovering that silence, too, can be sacred. Let this be the beginning of a different kind of prayer, one that listens as much as it speaks, one that waits with hope, one that seeks not just answers but understanding. Because sometimes the silence has a voice of its own, and if we are willing to hear it, it might say more than we ever imagined. There is a kind of silence that feels hollow, like an echo in an empty room. And then there is another kind, a holy quiet that, though difficult to endure, is filled with something deeper, something invisible but profoundly real. When God seems silent, it does not mean that He is gone. It does not mean that the prayer was lost or ignored. Rather, it may be that the silence itself is speaking, inviting the soul into a different kind of communion. For many, silence is uncomfortable. It confronts the heart with its own vulnerability. In a world full of noise, distraction, and immediate responses, Waiting in silence can feel unnatural. But the spiritual life is not built on speed or volume. It is built on trust, and trust does not always require answers. It requires presence. When heaven is silent, there is still movement. The surface may seem still, but beneath there can be growth. Faith is not always built in moments of visible intervention. Often it is forged in the furnace of waiting. In those seasons where nothing seems to change, when the same prayer has been offered 100 times, something begins to happen within the soul. The shallow roots that were once enough start to stretch deeper. The heart, no longer satisfied with surface-level assurances, begins to seek God not for what He can do, but for who He is. It is in the silence that the soul learns to listen differently. When no answer comes, the instinct may be to speak louder, to pray harder, to plead with greater desperation. But eventually, there comes a moment when the soul falls quiet, not out of despair, but out of surrender. And in that quiet, there is a shift. The silence no longer feels like abandonment. It begins to feel like an invitation. This is where intimacy grows. In the absence of clear answers, the soul leans into presence. It begins to sense that God's silence may be more deliberate than it seemed. Not a punishment, not a rejection, but a gentle drawing near. Like a teacher who allows the student to wrestle with the question so that the answer, when it finally comes, is not just understood, but owned. Scripture does not shy away from this theme. Psalm 22 verse 2 gives voice to the anguish many feel in these moments. "O my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest." These are not the words of someone who has walked away from faith. They are the cries of someone holding on, even in the dark. This kind of honesty is not weakness. It is the foundation of a deeper relationship. In the silence, God is not passive. He is working. But the work may not be visible. It may not unfold on the timeline we expect. And yet, the very act of waiting becomes a spiritual discipline. It teaches patience, resilience, and hope that is not dependent on immediate gratification. It teaches the soul to look beyond the tangible, to recognize the subtle ways in which God shapes and molds the heart when all other sounds have faded. There is a refining that takes place in the quiet. Just as metal is purified in fire, the soul is refined in waiting. The noise of our own desires and expectations begins to quiet. Pride gives way to humility. Control gives way to trust. The person who once prayed with conditions now learns to pray with surrender. Sometimes the silence is not about withholding, but about preparing. It is not a denial. It is a pause. Not because the prayer was wrong, but because the heart needed to be ready for what was to come. And in that readiness, there is a beauty that cannot be rushed. Those who have endured seasons of divine silence often speak of a closeness to God that did not come in moments of answered prayer, but in the long days and nights of waiting. It is a paradox of the spiritual life, that in the times when God seems most distant, He may actually be drawing closest, not through signs and wonders, but through a quiet presence that sustains without spectacle. This is a hard truth, but it is also a comforting one, because it means that silence is not empty. It is full of possibility, full of grace, full of love that is working beneath the surface, even when the heart cannot yet see the outcome. So, if you find yourself in a place where heaven feels silent, know this: you are not abandoned. You are not being punished. You are being invited into something deeper, a faith not based on sight, but on trust, a love not proven by words, but by presence, and a journey that does not end in silence, but begins there. There are moments in life when a prayer feels urgent, even desperate. The need seems obvious, the solution clear, and the heart speaks with intensity. Yet not every prayer, even when offered with sincerity, is rooted in the right place. Sometimes what we ask for reflects not our deepest trust, but our deepest fear. Sometimes it flows from a desire to control, to avoid pain, to preserve comfort. And other times it arises from a vision so limited that we cannot see the full weight of what we are truly requesting. Prayer is sacred, not because it guarantees outcomes, but because it opens the soul to relationship. It is meant to be more than a list of requests. It is an act of communion, a conversation shaped by honesty, humility, and faith. But even in this sacred space, the heart can be swayed by impulses that do not serve the larger good. When fear dominates the heart, prayer can become a plea to escape anything uncertain. When selfishness creeps in, prayer can become a tool to bend circumstances to one's own advantage. And when understanding is limited, as it often is, the things we ask for may not be what we actually need. This is not said to judge, but to gently redirect. To recognize that what feels right in a moment of urgency may not always align with the greater movement of grace. There are prayers that seem noble on the surface, but are rooted in a resistance to growth. Prayers to stay in places that no longer nurture the soul. Prayers to return to relationships that were never whole. Prayers to keep what was never meant to last. In those moments, it is not that God is unkind in remaining silent. It is that he is unwilling to affirm what would ultimately harm or hinder the soul. There is a tenderness in God's wisdom. He sees the layers beneath every request. He knows the story we are trying to write for ourselves, and he sees the story that is being written for us, one that is often deeper, more transformative, and more redemptive than we could imagine. The challenge is that these two stories do not always align. What we call unanswered prayer may in truth be redirected prayer, an invitation to look beyond the surface of our desires and ask what lies beneath. Psalm 139 verse 23 captures this spirit. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. This is not a prayer for results, but for revelation. It is a request to be known, not just in what we ask for, but in why we ask for it. And in that knowing, there is room for transformation. When we open ourselves not just to God's response, but to his discernment, something shifts. We begin to see that prayer is not about convincing God to act, but about allowing God to reveal. Sometimes what we want is peace, but what we pray for is escape. Sometimes what we seek is love, but what we ask for is validation. Sometimes what we desire is purpose, but what we chase is achievement. These are not wrong in themselves, but they can become shadows of what the soul truly needs. And in his silence, God may be pointing us back to the core, to ask again, to ask differently, to seek not just what we want, but what aligns with the life he is shaping within us. This shift is not easy. It requires letting go of certainty. It asks the heart to trust that it does not always know what is best, even when it feels sure. It invites a humility that is rare in a world that prizes self-direction. But it is in this humility that prayer becomes most powerful, not because it guarantees outcomes, but because it aligns the soul with truth. To pray in tune with God's will is not to abandon desire, but to refine it. It is to believe that what God desires for us is not less than what we imagine, but more lasting, more whole, more connected to the very reason we exist. And when the heart begins to pray from that place, it moves beyond fear, beyond selfishness, beyond the narrow confines of immediate longing. It begins to echo eternity. So if the prayer remains unanswered, it may not be because it was ignored. It may be because something deeper is being asked of you. A question behind the question, a longing beneath the request. And perhaps the first step is not to pray harder, but to pause and ask, am I seeking what is truly best, or simply what feels best in this moment? There is a pain in hearing no, especially when that no comes after earnest, heartfelt prayer. The heart had hoped, the mind had imagined, and the soul had stretched itself toward heaven, only to receive what feels like a closed door. It is in these moments that the word no can feel like rejection, like loss, like something sacred slipping through the fingers. But what if that no was not the end of the conversation? What if it was not denial but direction? We often come to God with specific pictures in mind. We see the job that seems perfect, the relationship that feels destined, the opportunity that looks like the answer to every whispered hope. And when that vision fades, when the door closes despite our prayers, it can leave us questioning everything. But sometimes what feels like disappointment is actually divine protection, not because the thing we wanted was bad in itself, but because it was not right for the path we are meant to walk. There are prayers that, if answered as requested, would have led us into places we were not prepared to navigate. Roads that seemed straight from our limited view may have curved into danger just out of sight. People who seemed right may have drawn us away from our purpose. Dreams that sparkled on the surface may have pulled us into shadows. And in those unseen places, the no becomes an act of mercy. It is hard to accept this when the heart is still aching, but over time, patterns emerge. Looking back, many can point to moments when a closed door led to a better one, though it was not visible at the time. There is a quiet grace in this unfolding, a recognition that what felt like loss was actually an act of love, that what we were denied was not withheld out of cruelty, but out of care. Psalm 84 verse 11 offers this assurance, "For the Lord God is a sun and shield. The Lord bestows favor and honor. No good thing does he withhold from those who walk uprightly." This does not mean every desire is granted. It means that what is truly good, good in a way that aligns with who we are becoming, is never kept from us. And that includes the kind of good we cannot yet see. Sometimes the no is a redirection. Not away from blessing, but toward a blessing we did not think to ask for. It is the kind of answer that grows clearer with time. In the moment, it can feel like a rupture, but later it often looks like a turning point, the moment the story began to shift. The path opened not by what we received, but by what we were kept from receiving. There are also times when the no is not about timing or readiness, but about reshaping our understanding of what we truly need. We ask for peace, and we imagine the removal of conflict. But perhaps the greater yes is learning to carry peace within, even when the world is unsteady. We ask for healing in the body, but perhaps the deeper healing needed is in the soul. We ask for success, but perhaps what will truly fulfill us is significance, purpose, or transformation. These are not easy truths. They require trust in something beyond sight. They ask us to believe that the architect of our lives sees further than we do, and that his no is never without intention. Not every no will make sense quickly. Some may never fully resolve in this lifetime, but even then, there is room for hope. Because even in the unanswered, even in the unexplained, there is a God who does not abandon his own. To live with this kind of trust is not to silence grief. It is not to pretend that disappointment does not sting. It is to carry both grief and hope together, to allow sorrow to be real, while still holding space for a future that may unfold in ways we cannot yet imagine. It is to live with open hands, willing to release what we thought we needed in order to receive what was always meant for us. And in that posture of surrender, a different kind of prayer begins to form. Not just for outcomes, but for discernment. Not just for answers, but for alignment. A prayer that says, even if the answer is no, I will trust that something better is being written. And in time, when the greater yes is revealed, the no will no longer feel like a wound. It will feel like grace. The human heart often seeks resolution with urgency. When prayers are lifted, the expectation is that movement will follow quickly, that answers will descend in clear and visible ways. Yet, the sacred often unfolds in a manner that resists our pace. The rhythm of divine work does not rush to meet our deadlines, and this can be one of the greatest trials for the soul, trusting in a process that moves outside of our control. People are conditioned to respond to timelines, to plans, to outcomes that fit within understandable frames. When days become weeks, and weeks stretch into months or years without the prayer being answered, the heart begins to question whether it has been forgotten. But silence is not the same as abandonment, and delay is not the same as denial. Timing in the hands of God is not passive, it is purposeful. There are qualities in the human spirit that only emerge when time is allowed to refine them. Patience cannot grow in an instant. Endurance does not bloom in comfort. Deep faith is not forged in moments of ease, but in the sustained act of trusting when the path ahead remains uncertain. What is being shaped in the waiting may be far more valuable than the thing being waited for. In the stillness, strength is built. The soul, learning to wait without bitterness, begins to develop a trust that is no longer tied to circumstances. The delay, rather than weakening faith, becomes the place where faith matures. It is in this space that people begin to release control, to let go of rigid expectations, and to open themselves to possibilities greater than they had imagined. Psalm 27 verse 14 speaks directly into this struggle. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. This is not a passive waiting, but an active one. It is a call to remain anchored in trust, even when every external sign suggests nothing is changing. It is a kind of waiting that transforms the person within while the answer remains unseen. At times, what feels like a delay is actually alignment. The pieces that need to shift, the doors that must open, the hearts that need softening, these elements often lie beyond what we can perceive. God is not slow in the way we define slowness. He is intentional. Every moment that passes without an answer may be shaping a future that holds more than we initially requested. There are stories written across lives where what was once considered unanswered turned out to be perfectly timed. The opportunity that came years later than expected brought not just success, but peace. The relationship that seemed delayed arrived with depth and maturity that would have been missing earlier. The healing that did not come immediately opened a journey of compassion and inner resilience that stretched far beyond personal relief. These experiences are not uncommon. Many who have walked long roads of waiting eventually discover that what they received was not only what they needed, but something richer, deeper, and more lasting than what they had first imagined. And in those realizations, timing becomes not an obstacle, but a testimony. Letting go of our timeline is not easy. It asks us to release the illusion of control, to stop measuring progress by immediate results, and to believe that what is unseen is still unfolding with care. This kind of surrender is not weak. It is the foundation of enduring faith. A trust that rests not in swift answers, but in the certainty that when the time is right, what is meant to be will come. And it will come not a moment too soon or too late, but precisely when the soul is ready to receive it. Most people live their lives guided by what they can touch, measure, and observe. Decisions are often made by what is seen, and truth is frequently equated with what is visible. But the spiritual life invites a different understanding, one that acknowledges dimensions beyond the material, when prayers seem delayed without reason, when the silence is too long, and the waiting becomes exhausting. There may be something happening that the eyes cannot witness and the mind cannot fully comprehend. A battle may be unfolding in the realm that lies beyond human perception. Scripture does not present the spiritual realm as an abstract idea. It portrays it as active, complex, and deeply involved in the course of earthly lives. One of the most striking illustrations of this reality appears in the book of Daniel. The prophet had prayed for understanding, and his answer was delayed for 21 days. When the angel finally appeared to him, the reason for the delay was not a lack of care or divine intention. It was resistance. In Daniel 10 verse 13, the angel explained, "The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. This was not a metaphor, it was a revelation. A spiritual confrontation had delayed the arrival of an answer, even though the prayer had been heard from the beginning. This glimpse into the invisible reminds us that prayer does not travel through empty air. It enters a realm where forces beyond human sight are at work. Some of those forces oppose peace, truth, and healing. They do not wish for restoration or freedom to arrive. They do not want clarity to break through or joy to be renewed. And though they do not have the final word, their resistance can shape the timing and unfolding of divine response. In seasons where silence stretches long, it is not always because the request was wrong or the heart was misaligned. It may be that a struggle is underway, one that requires persistence in prayer, not as a means to force God's hand, but as a declaration of trust in the middle of conflict. Prayer, then, becomes more than petition. It becomes participation in a deeper spiritual reality. It becomes a light that holds steady in darkness, a signal that faith remains even when the winds rage unseen. The knowledge of this battle does not need to provoke fear. Instead, it brings clarity. It reveals that the journey of prayer is not linear. It is layered with complexities that do not always resolve neatly or immediately. But within those layers, there is power. The voice that prays in perseverance grows stronger. The soul that continues to seek, despite the delay, becomes a witness to truths that are formed not just in what is received, but in how one continues in hope. It is important to remember that these battles, though hidden, are not beyond God's command. Nothing escapes His view, nothing unfolds without His awareness. Even in the moments when the answer feels blocked, God is not distant. He is near. He is present in the unseen, orchestrating the eventual victory even when the conflict still rages. The delay is not a sign of weakness in heaven. It is often a sign that something of great worth is being contested. Psalm 34 verse 17 gives voice to this assurance. When the righteous cry for help, the Lord hears and delivers them out of all their troubles. The hearing is immediate, even if the delivering sometimes arrives through struggle. Every prayer is recorded, every cry is known. Even when the answer is not yet visible, the movement has already begun. This understanding transforms the way prayer is held in the heart. Rather than seeing the delay as emptiness, it becomes a signal of weight. It means the prayer is significant. It means something is being stirred, opposed, protected, or prepared. And while the soul waits, while the eyes see nothing, heaven is not silent in effort. It is engaged in love. To continue in prayer during these moments is not just a discipline, it is a spiritual stance. It is standing firm when the ground feels uncertain. It is holding on when the outcome is unclear. And in doing so, the person who prays does not just wait for change, they become part of the change. They become a force of light, holding space for breakthrough that may take time, but is never out of reach. In many lives, prayer becomes a place of expression, a sacred outlet where emotions are poured out, needs are spoken, and burdens are released. It is a precious part of spiritual life, this honesty with God, and there is beauty in the way hearts open fully in those moments. Yet for all the talking, there often remains an emptiness, a sense that something is missing. The reason is not always because the words are wrong or the heart insincere. It may be because one part of the conversation has been neglected, the part where listening begins. True relationship is built not only on sharing but on hearing. The same is true in communion with God. When prayer is one-sided, it becomes a monologue, and though it may carry truth and vulnerability, it risks missing the response that was always meant to come. Listening is not passive. It is not simply waiting in silence for words to fill the space. It is an act of spiritual attentiveness, a posture of the heart that says, "Speak, for I am ready to hear something other than my own voice." The difficulty is not always unwillingness to listen. Sometimes it is the volume of everything else. Life moves quickly, minds become crowded with responsibilities, expectations, and fears. Even in the moments carved out for prayer, thoughts race, agendas form, and the soul struggles to settle. In such a state, it is not surprising that the voice of God can feel distant. Not because he is silent, but because there is too much noise within to hear him clearly. Scripture invites a different rhythm. In Psalm 46 verse 10, the command is both gentle and firm. Be still and know that I am God. Stillness is not inactivity. It is intentional presence. It is the practice of quieting the external and internal chaos to create space where God's whisper can be heard. And often, it is in that whisper that the most profound truths are spoken, not in thunder but in stillness. Not with fireworks, but with clarity that comes only when the heart has learned to be silent. Learning to listen begins with humility. It requires setting aside the assumption that we already know what needs to be done. It invites surrender, not just of outcomes, but of expectations. When the soul listens, it does so with open hands. It does not come demanding direction on specific terms. It comes with a willingness to receive, even if what is heard is different from what was expected. Sometimes the response comes not in words, but in impressions, a sense of peace that settles when a certain path is considered, a conviction that arises when something misaligns with truth, a clarity that was missing until space was made to truly listen. These are not imagined. They are the language of a spirit who knows how to speak in ways that the heart understands, even when the mind cannot fully explain. This way of listening transforms the nature of prayer. It becomes less about convincing God and more about communing with Him. It becomes a space where wisdom is formed, not through the repetition of requests, but through the deepening of understanding. Over time, those who learn to listen often discover that their prayers begin to change. What once felt urgent may no longer seem essential. What once was asked for out of fear may be released in trust. And in that release, peace begins to rise. To listen also means to allow God to ask questions of the heart. Where are you going? Why are you afraid? What are you holding on to? These are not accusations, they are invitations, and they only come when space is made for them. They only surface when the soul has stopped speaking long enough to hear what is being spoken back. This does not mean that every moment of prayer must be silent. There is still room for words, for requests, for praise and lament. But in the rhythm of true relationship, listening is essential. Without it, something vital is lost. With it, something sacred is gained, a deeper awareness, a richer connection, and a sense that prayer is not just about finding answers, but about being transformed through conversation. Many who pray come seeking resolution, relief, or a shift in the world around them. They ask for change in their environment, in their relationships, in their circumstances, and often these requests come from places of genuine need, born out of struggle or longing. Yet beneath the surface of what seems to be an unanswered prayer, something else may be happening, something slower, quieter, and far more enduring. The very act of waiting, of seeking without receiving, may be reshaping the soul from the inside out. There are moments when God does not remove the storm, but instead teaches the heart to walk through it differently. The burden is not lifted, yet somehow the person carrying it grows stronger. The question remains unresolved, but the spirit becomes more grounded. The longing does not fade, but alongside it emerges a peace that was previously unknown. In these mysterious spaces, transformation takes root. What was once a prayer for change becomes a journey into becoming. The desire for external change is deeply human. It is easier to ask for circumstances to shift than to examine what those circumstances may be revealing within. But unanswered prayers have a way of confronting the interior life. peeling back the layers that often go unnoticed in seasons of ease. In the silence, pride begins to loosen its grip. Control starts to unravel. The soul, laid bare by the absence of immediate resolution, is open to growth that no comfort could produce. Spiritual transformation rarely begins with clarity. It often begins with disorientation, with the realization that old patterns, old coping mechanisms, and old ways of understanding are no longer sufficient. The unanswered prayer becomes a mirror, reflecting not only the pain of waiting, but the possibilities for change that the waiting brings. And though the path is rarely easy, it leads to places of wisdom and resilience that cannot be reached by any other road. Psalm 51 verse 10 captures the heart of this transformation. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. This is not a prayer for external change. It is a plea for internal renewal, a recognition that the real breakthrough may not come through altered circumstances, but through a changed soul. And when that change begins, it touches every part of life. Not only how one prays, but how one lives, how one loves, how one responds to both joy and hardship. Sometimes the growth is subtle. Patience that once seemed impossible begins to take shape. Compassion for others deepens, born out of one's own prolonged struggle. Clarity about what truly matters emerges, stripping away distractions that once seemed important. This kind of growth is not loud, it does not announce itself, but over time, it becomes undeniable. There are also deeper healings that occur in the absence of immediate answers. Wounds long hidden are brought into the light. False identities, built on performance or approval, begin to fall away. In the silence of unanswered prayer, the soul often finds its truest voice, not the one shaped by fear or ambition, but the one anchored in truth and grace. And in discovering that voice, a new sense of self begins to rise. This self is not defined by achievement or by having every question resolved. It is defined by wholeness, a wholeness that emerges from having faced the dark and found light within it. A wholeness formed not through avoidance of suffering, but through meeting it with courage and faith. It is the kind of transformation that cannot be undone. It shapes not just how a person prays, but how they see the world, how they walk through disappointment, and how they carry hope. In time, it may become clear that what was once viewed as silence or denial was actually an invitation to become, to step into a version of life that is more rooted, more free, more aligned with the very heart of God. The prayer may not have been answered in the way it was spoken, but it was answered in a deeper way, through the formation of a person who is no longer only asking for change, but embodying it. Time has a way of revealing what the moment could not. When the heart is still raw from disappointment or confusion, it struggles to see purpose through the haze. But years later, in the stillness of reflection, patterns begin to emerge, subtle, yet unmistakable. What once appeared as silence or rejection slowly transforms into a series of divine appointments, each one carrying a gift that was hidden in plain sight. Looking back, it becomes clear that some of the most profound blessings were not delivered through answered prayers, but through the very prayers that went seemingly unanswered. At the time, it may have felt like loss, the door that did not open, the opportunity that slipped away, the dream that never materialized. But as the path continued, new doors appeared, often leading to places that could not have been foreseen or planned. People entered the journey who would never have crossed paths if the original prayer had been granted. Strengths were discovered in hardship that would have remained buried had comfort been given too soon. Gratitude, which once seemed impossible, began to rise not despite the journey, but because of it. This kind of hindsight is not about romanticizing pain or pretending that the waiting was easy. It is about recognizing that the story is larger than the moment. It is about seeing that the detours were not deviations from purpose, but part of it. Sometimes what we call delays are actually preparations. Sometimes what we label as failures are foundations being laid for something greater. And sometimes what we mourned as loss turns out to be the very thing that made room for joy that would not have fit alongside what we thought we needed. Psalm 77 verse 11 captures this spirit of remembrance. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your wonders of old. These words do not speak from a place of immediate clarity. They come after wrestling, after questioning, after a season of searching. But in remembering, perspective shifts. The pain does not vanish, but it is reframed. The silence is no longer empty. It becomes filled with meaning. Reflection brings wisdom. It uncovers how much has changed, not only in the world around, but within the soul itself. The person who once prayed from a place of desperation may now stand with a quiet strength formed in the fire of endurance. The person who felt abandoned may now see the countless ways they were sustained, through people, through small provisions, through moments of unexpected peace that carried them when nothing else made sense. This gratitude does not always come with fanfare. It often arrives softly, like a whisper in the heart, a recognition that something sacred has taken place, not in spite of the unanswered prayers, but because of them. And in that recognition, faith deepens. Not the kind of faith that demands immediate proof, but the kind that trusts the long arc of grace. Even now, there are likely prayers that still feel unresolved, questions that remain open, and yet, looking back provides a reminder that clarity often lags behind obedience. The miracle is not always in what was received, but in what was shaped through the waiting, through the letting go, through the trust that held steady when no answer seemed to come. For many, it is in hindsight that they finally see the fingerprints of God on every page of their story. Not just in the victories, but in the losses, not just in the breakthroughs, but in the breakdowns, and in that realization, a different kind of miracle emerges, not the one they once begged for, but the one they have now become. The journey through unanswered prayer is not one of defeat, but of deepening. Each step along the way, through silence, surrender, redirection, transformation, teaches something vital about the nature of faith. And as the story unfolds, one truth remains constant. Prayer is not merely about results, it is about relationship. To pray without ceasing does not mean repeating the same words endlessly or striving for perfect devotion. It means living in a continual posture of openness to God, where the heart remains turned toward Him regardless of what circumstances may bring. It is not an obligation to perform, it is an invitation to abide. In seasons of joy, the prayer may sound like praise. In moments of confusion, it may come as a whisper. In sorrow, it may be wordless altogether, but in every form, it is real, it is sacred, and it matters, not because of eloquence, but because of presence. The soul that returns to God again and again, even in the midst of waiting or pain, is a soul that knows the deeper truth, that prayer is not wasted, even when the answer is not what was expected. Some days, the act of prayer will feel strong and focused. Other days, it may feel like all the strength left is in simply staying open. But the beauty of God's heart is that He welcomes both. He honors the simple cry as much as the elaborate song. He listens not only to the words, but to the spaces between them. In Luke 18, Jesus tells the story of a persistent widow who kept coming to a judge, not because she had power, but because she refused to give up. Her persistence was honored, not because she wore the judge down, but because her continual asking reflected a trust that He alone could grant justice. In the same way, persistent prayer is not about trying to change God's mind. It is about remaining in relationship long enough for that relationship to change us. To pray without ceasing is to acknowledge that God is present in every moment, not just the ones that feel spiritual, in work, in rest, in conflict, in quiet. And even when the answer is not visible, even when heaven seems silent or life feels uncertain, the call remains. Keep praying, keep seeking, keep bringing the heart back to the one who knows it fully. It may not always be easy, but it will always be worth it. Because prayer is not simply about outcomes. It is about communion. It is about knowing that even in the waiting, even in the longing, even in the silence, you are not alone. If this message has spoken to your heart, if you've ever found yourself wrestling with silence, longing for answers, or wondering what it all means, know that you are seen. Your prayers matter. Your story is unfolding, even in the quiet. Let this be more than a video. Let it be a reminder to hold on, to keep praying, and to trust that something sacred is still at work in your life. If you felt encouraged today, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It helps this message reach more people who need hope and perspective. Like the video, leave a comment sharing your own journey or reflections, and share this message with someone close to you, someone who may also be walking through their own season of unanswered prayers. Thank you for being here. Keep the conversation going, and above all, keep your heart open to the one who hears you always.